I am really excited about the opportunity you're going to have over the next 55 minutes or so to hear from Jay Schneider and be able to ask questions of him. I first met Jay when he was very young, and I was the president and CEO of University of Wisconsin Health System. And one of the things that Jay did really well was imagine what things were going to be like in the future and imagined a digital presence for UW that we weren't even close to being or close to delivering. So his thoughts were so convincing that I hired him to completely transform the way we thought about our website, intranet, and our internet and our intranet, and then to build a team that could start thinking about where did we go with our digital presence. When I left UW, Jay left at about the same time to go be an executive director, I think, for Disney, and was there for about 10 years. And we crossed every so often when he'd meet me at one of the parks with my grandkid and let me go help me get in. So that was a great perk. So then I found out about a year or so ago that Jay was moving from Disney, but now he's with Royal Caribbean Holdings. So I'm fascinated with that and wonder if he'll meet me at a cruise terminal sometime with my family. But at any rate, what is really fascinating about Jay is the way that he's approached change for the customer. And I know we struggle with that. We think about that a lot, but we haven't cracked through it. He and I were having dinner last January in Miami, where he lives, and he asked me, he said, you know, I think about healthcare a lot, even though I'm not in healthcare any longer. Who's really doing a good job of meeting patient needs and doing it with what the patients are going to need in the future? And I said, I'm embarrassed to say, I don't think anybody is. And so that sparked my imagination to think about him talking to us about leading through change and how it sometimes gets messy, but he has some great messages for us to think about. And maybe when we leave here, we're all going to be rebels, but we'll do it together. So at any rate, Jay Schneider.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks for having me. You all may have seen this cartoon before. And if you haven't, it's one of my favorite cartoons that we often share with the leadership within our company or with our board. And the real thing that I love about this panel is this last panel is really where I come in. So Donna did a great job setting up my background. I spent the last almost 3 years at Royal Caribbean as the Senior Vice President of Digital and leading our business transformation efforts. Before that, about a decade at the Walt Disney Company in various roles, and then I had the honor to work for Donna for about 6 or 7 years at UW Health. I'm going to take you through 4 quick stories. I think we have about an hour, and I'm going to leave some time for questions at the end. I see there's some mics for questions. It's a little bit of macro trends happening because to understand the impact change has on everybody, you've got to understand the trends around. Messiness of change, just learnings that I've had over my career of the impact of change that it can have and some of the messiness that spits out as a result. How we inspire change among our teams, our companies, and then a little bit of our evolving customer experience just with some last lessons of how we think about it. You're going to hear things in here from me that are what I call my beliefs, and I'll try to call them out along the way. These are not well-written dogma that everybody espouses to. These are things that I believe and things that I believe are important for companies and businesses that interact with customers, and you all do that, we do that. I use customer in the broadest sense. Our customers at Royal Caribbean are guests who vacation with us, and then crew who service those guests. So when I say customer, I mean that in the broadest possible sense. So I believe in this mantra, which is every company has to, of course, do their thing, whatever it is. But in the future, companies that are both experienced companies, and I mean that as much as really focus on their end-to-end customer journey and understand the needs of their customers, plus be a technology company because of the pace of change going on in the world today. Everybody has to be a technology company, whether you want to or not. Whether you're Goodyear Tires, healthcare, or travel, you have to be a technology company. And so for me, this formula to get to success is you have to do your thing, you have to be an experience company, and you have to be a tech company all at the same time, which for many companies can be a daunting thing. To understand that, I'm going to start with the macro trends that we see today. And again, some of these are mom and apple pie. You'll look at those and go, yeah, of course, I already know that. So hopefully some of the stories illuminate why I think they're important and why others think they're important as well. The first one is the pace of change continues to accelerate. Somebody I work for has this theory that says the pace of change is never as slow as it is today. It never will be as slow as it is today. And you can see that in numbers. So this is a pretty common thing you can find on the internet if you go search it out. The time to get to 50 million users, the telephone was 75 years. It took 19 days for Pokemon Go to hit 50 million users, which is pretty dramatic. And this is before really the resurgence, if you want to call it that, of artificial or augmented intelligence. I don't know if that will ever be in minutes, because that seems a little ridiculous to be able to hit 50 million people in minutes. But again, the pace of change really continues to accelerate. That is neatly tied with the second one, which is really around this notion that customers are always connected. I imagine all of you have a smartphone somewhere in your pocket, purse, wallet, whatever it is. This is a graphic that's kept up to date, and this is the 2019 version of it. Today, in a 60-second period, so in an internet minute, 188 million emails will be sent. 4.5 million YouTube videos will be viewed. My joke when always looking at this is really simple, which is I thought people work. What are they doing watching YouTube videos? But somebody once said that might be instructional video that they're watching. I'm not sure the value of 1 million logins on Facebook during my workday, but that's a different question. Anyway, so the point here is real simple. Customers are always on. This is an always connected world. Your customers are always online. One of the questions I often get is, how do I think of demographic changes in travel and the impact they have? Do I think that the technology that we bring to customers in a cruise industry, wherein sometimes you have disconnected customers and you have potentially older customers, do you see differences? And my answers are typically the same. We at least find that yes, there is a desire for customers to be disconnected. About 99% of our guests bring a phone on board a ship and use it in some way, shape, or form. That means there is 1% who do want to disconnect, which is great because you're going on a vacation. And the other thing is we see as many millennials trying to stay connected in our vacation as we do baby boomers. So there really isn't this notion that it varies based on age bracket. Yes, it's probably true. When you look at my 6-year-old who spends way too much time buried into her tablet. But for the most part, everybody is connected. The third point in here is really disruption is now widespread. I worked at the Walt Disney Company, and the Walt Disney Company has this belief, and it's not a wrong belief, that there aren't a whole lot of competitors. When I first started working there, somebody said to me, well, we don't have to worry about Universal down the road. We've beat them. We've kind of won the war as it relates to attractions and theme parks. Which was largely true. If you look at some of the economic trends over the last decade, that is a largely true statement. However, the rise of Airbnb created about 100,000 new hotel beds, not overnight, but over a course of a short period of time. And that was unexpected disruption. So things like Airbnb and Uber are disrupting industries. Now, Spotify, if you think of music, is on its music's on second or third disruption and surviving, whereas news continues to struggle. And so I threw Twitter up here, but that's an example of a kind of fourth generation of disruption still happening. I like to say that, two guys in a garage in California can't build $1 billion cruise ship and compete with us. But as an industry, we have to grow volume. So the industry is adding ships. We're trying to grow the industry. And so that disruption comes from hotels, travel, elsewhere. And so as an industry, we have to be conscious of disruption. As an industry, you all have to be conscious of the disruption happening around you, even if it isn't direct disruption. This is one of my favorite trends. Patient care, I would argue, and travel, I know, is an episodic relationship with our customers. I wish people went on vacation every day of every year. I wish I was on vacation of every day of every year. Unfortunately, that's not the case. We spend as consumers the vast majority of our time in our email, in our calendar, messaging, potentially at Starbucks, possibly on Yelp, using tools day in and day out, which means the relationship that I as a customer have with a travel provider like ourselves, or even again, patient care, is episodic. It means that customer expectations are set by everybody else but yourself. So that means the moment that you have with your customer has to be, you have to cherish that moment. If I've got 10 minutes with a customer to sell them a cruise, I don't want to spend 9 of those minutes trying to have them learn our design system or our site navigation or our whatever that is. I want to use that trying to sell them our vacation. And so in any moment, in episodic brands like ours, we have to cherish those moments by not putting barriers in front of them. It's one of those key trends that we all have to be aware of. Knowledge of your customer needs to be seamless. So when I moved to Miami, I signed up for, I used ZocDoc as a way to find a provider. I needed to go see a doctor. It was great. I found a doctor, I booked an appointment. It asked me to fill out information. It took a picture of my driver's license and my insurance card, and I was all set. And I showed up at the appointment, pleasantly surprised that the appointment was there, so it worked, and I was really excited. And then they handed me a stack of papers that was about that thick, and asked me to start filling out all of the information that I'd already provided in the app. And I kind of complained. I said, listen, I don't understand why did I do all of this stuff? And they said, well, that integrates with the system, but our office isn't part of that system, so we've got to have you redo all of that information. One of the things we did at Disney while I was there, I ran the digital side of the My Magic Plus implementation. In that ecosystem was the Magic Band. And so the theory was we took all of the stuff on the right and added it over to the band. The reality is it was all centered around the customer. It was all centered around the guest. So no matter how the guest interacted with any of the physical world, the digital world, whether it was a smartphone app, a Magic Band, your hotel room door, all knew everything at every moment about that customer. I worked with somebody once who said, nobody owns the customer, but everybody owns the moment. And it's important to win at that moment. And if you think about it, back to my ZocDoc example, at that point as a customer, I get there in a health system, I get there part of it, and they weren't connected, but they lost that moment with me as a customer. And so for us at Disney, that was always a focus. Never lose that moment when you have it in front of you. At Royal Caribbean, we're not quite there yet. It's a journey. And so today, if you use our kids program, despite having already boarded our ship, despite having registered, we still hand you that chunk of paper and make you fill it out. That's going away. As one of my missions is to snuff out paper whenever I possibly can, because you should never have to do that twice. Once you know your consumer, your consumer should never have to repeat their name, their information that they've already provided you, which I recognize can be problematic in large systems, whether that's travel or even healthcare. This one you're going to hear from me quite a bit today, and that is frictionless as expected. So people don't want lines. It's the simple way to think about it. And I'll talk later about both real friction as well as what I call lazy friction. But we chased an experience at Disney, not because we wanted to go try new technology, because people had to wait in lines. Lines and removing friction was a key focus for us. For Royal, we were the first cruise line to invent facial recognition boarding. We launched it back in December, and we're scaling it this year. We operate the largest, most badass ships on the planet, and then the smallest, most petite ships that can pull into the Galapagos in a very safe way. The largest ship, an Oasis-class ship, It takes about 60 to 90 minutes when I got to the company 3 years ago for a guest to board the ship. And if you're a family of 4, that meant you were waiting in line a lot. And so we set an audacious goal to get you from what I called car to bar in less than 10 minutes. And the whole idea was to get you on vacation faster. And what we heard from people is the effort it took to get on a cruise ship didn't make them feel like they were on vacation until day 2. And so facial recognition technology was part of it. Better crew tools were part of it, all with the motivation to remove lines and hassles. And you'll see that friction removal theme throughout this story. But again, customers expect it. And you can think about it in your own life. Anytime you're waiting behind somebody 5 people deep with a question, a problem, your level of frustration is very different than when you're just sitting on the couch channel surfing. So removing those moments make a difference in how you deliver technology and, frankly, customer experience to people. The next one is personalization is really the norm. It used to say the new norm, but it really is the norm. So these are 3 examples that are out there that do a pretty darn good job personalizing. Netflix originally got in the business to disrupt movie distribution, really compete with Blockbuster, and ended up successfully killing Blockbuster. But I imagine many of you have seen Orange is the New Black or any number of shows that are on Netflix that are originals for that brand. And interesting enough, they didn't get into the business to do show production. They actually got into the business to disrupt distribution. What they learned along the way is the data that they were collecting on their customers, the personalization that you were given by managing your Netflix queue, allowed them to see their customer in a completely different light and understand patterns that allowed them to create new content. Now, on the flip side, I'm a little bit of a privacy hawk, and so I'm not a huge fan of the fact that Amazon has a secret microphone sitting in my house listening to every waking moment. And so companies, as you think of personalization and providing that next level of experience to people, have to be conscious of the privacy side of it, which is actually why I throw Amazon and Google on here. Amazon never wanted to admit that they were recording everything, but you saw in the news recently that they literally are recording everything. Google's gotten to the point where they now actually can detect who you are against your voice pattern, and then are also storing that for eternity, effectively. And so you have to think through those ramifications as you get into personalization. I mentioned data already. Since we're in Texas, oil is a good metaphor. Data really is the new oil as you think of how businesses are going to compete in the future. I'm going to give you a couple examples here. The first is you have to have data. We have this mantra that what gets measured gets better, and my joke is always that's because we don't measure enough. We worked on a food waste program recently with the whole idea to reduce food waste at sea, which is a really great initiative. We did it for a couple of reasons. One, as part of our overall sustainability goal, but 2, reducing food waste means cost efficiencies, and then if you think of trying to carry stuff in refrigeration, it's just easier not from a supply chain to have to do that. We went in it and we learned quickly we didn't track data to help do that. So we wanted to reduce waste, but we didn't have the data set to do it because in the continuum of data collection, we were very much gut-based. Our chefs had been around for a long time. They knew best when to pull a piece of high-value protein out of the freezer, how long it could be there within FDA guidelines, and when they had to throw it away. And they kind of knew what they thought was best to do it. So we had to start collecting data. Now, once we collected data, we were able to build a learning model that eventually beat the chef. It took a while, it took a couple runs, but now we save about 10 to 15%. The outcome that we didn't expect is actually our food is fresher longer. We were able to actually retrain the chef how to think about the time period, and it led to not just a reduction in food waste, but a fresher outcome as well, which is pretty great. There is a tremendous amount of change management telling a chef who's cooked something the same way for 30 years to do something different, as you can imagine. And so as we implement this, that's actually the fascinating metric that I saw as the result of this, or that came out of this, is the compute power is about 10%, the algorithms about 20% of the effort that you have to adjust as you go ship by ship or restaurant by restaurant. 70% of the implementation is change management. 70% of the effort involved is getting the kitchen staff to think different with the data and tools that we can provide them if they're willing to make the change. The second one is, even though you have the data, you've got to make sure you know it and you use it. So some of you may have heard this before, but one of the original inventors of the autonomous vehicle for Google had to be coaxed into coming to Google. He was a professor at Stanford, a researcher at Stanford. He didn't want to come because he didn't think he could be successful. They offered him a ton of money. They offered him unlimited staff. He said no. Eventually, it was really the fact that as Google's been mapping, they've been gathering tons of data on elements throughout the world as they've been mapping Street View. So much so, you probably saw, and I read the article this morning, as early as this morning, they're settling a privacy lawsuit because they weren't just recording all of the telemetry that you'd expect, images, they have LiDAR on these machines. They were also sniffing Wi-Fi networks, passwords, email addresses. Literally, as they were driving down the street, they were just absorbing all of the data that was around them. So it's important to have it. It's also important to make sure you're using it for the right purpose. And the last piece I want to end on is it really is about visualization, and you'll hear this later on in the story. For me, storytelling is important, and so as you think of data coming to life, this is a visualization we did with the University of Miami as part of trying to map the Galapagos, and it looks at the impact that cruise lines have in the Galapagos from a number of metrics. The visualization of how you think of the use of data is critical in the future of success. So those are just some of the macro trends that hopefully will inform a little bit of the rest of this as I go through this. The next chapter is really around what I call the messiness of change, and it's a couple learnings that I have that I've found in my career that have helped push through change. The first one is, I'm a believer you can't farm this stuff out. So I will be the first to admit, I've worked at the current company I'm at for 3 years. I was effectively employee one of our digital transformation group. I have about somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 people that work for me now in some way, shape, or form. I didn't get there by hiring 1,200 people and convincing them all to come to Miami. I need partners to help. You just can't farm out the intellectual capital at a leadership level. And so I'm not throwing Accenture or Hertz under the bus. Accenture's a partner of mine. I love them. They're great. I'm sure I've rented a Hertz car before. If you're in the audience and have a spouse that works at Hertz, I'm only slightly making fun of Hertz. I'm literally just reading off the legal filing that was posted in LexisNexis from between Hertz and Accenture. So Hertz is suing Accenture, is the simple one. And these are literally the first 2 quotes on the right-hand side that are in the first 2 pages of the lawsuit if you want to read it. It's a fascinating read if you like technology in any way, shape, or form. So the first thing that Hertz acknowledges in the lawsuit is, one, they had no internal expertise to execute a transformation of technology within their company. They wanted to rethink their website, their apps, their connected consumer. They wanted to rethink it all. And they acknowledge in the legal filing they had no expertise whatsoever anywhere in the company. The second thing that they acknowledge in the filing is that they brought in a bunch of folks, and Accenture did a 1-day presentation. And the third thing that they acknowledge in the filing is that after that 1-day presentation, they awarded a $32 million bid to Accenture to go execute the work. They are now unhappy with the outcome, and they are now suing Accenture. Now, when you read the countersuit, Accenture lays out some of the things that they believe this is an egregious filing. The macro point is you can't farm this out. You can't expect that technology, transformation, change in your business can be something that somebody else can do. You have to do it yourself. That doesn't mean, again, you can't rely on lots of people to do it, but you really have to have that intellectual capital within your corporation. I have made, admittedly, some mistakes. In fact, we just finished a settlement on something where we made that same mistake. It was of a really small fraction compared to $32 million. But again, areas where we didn't have enough intellectual leadership within our own space. The second thing is you've got to find the right talent. I'm sure some of you in the room have seen Ratatouille. The whole premise in Ratatouille is anyone can cook. That's Gusteau's premise. And the reality is that's not true. Now, I think the story is supposed to be anybody can cook and maybe not everybody's a chef, but the reality is not everybody can cook, and that's okay. Everybody has expertise. Finding the right expertise is a complicated thing. The team of people who created this, I always say, shouldn't drive a ship, and the reverse is true. There's certain things I shouldn't do, and driving a large cruise ship is one of them. But the point is that you've got to find the right talent for the right need here, especially as you're going through change in your organization at any time. The next one is really around organizational design. As you think of the role of technology and experience transformation in companies, the future really has to be bought in at the senior-most leadership level. And buy-in is different than involvement. And so I take it off of buy-in and move it into involvement. As leaders in companies, we all have to be involved in the transformation that's happening. This isn't something that you can farm out to people. And so C-suite involvement and board involvement is absolutely critical as we think of that level of involvement. Somebody asked me, I was speaking to a group of accountants at the University of Miami recently, and they asked me if our board has a committee focused on innovation, and the answer is no, but our board is actively involved in understanding how innovation, technology, data, AI will continue to transform our company and our industry. And so that active dialogue has to happen. If it's not happening enough, that's a sign that you're not being an experienced company and a technology company in addition to everything else you're doing, and so that's an important step. This next one is probably more of a poke, and again, this is a me belief, but it's probably more of a poke at the industry overall. For the longest time, the role of technology or IT or the CIO grew up under the thumb screws, if you will, of the CFO. And so for the most part, CIOs on the planet are really great at controlling cost, finding efficiency, driving that cost and efficiency, working with vendors, trying to find the cheapest possible solution. The problem is, there's a problem and there's a benefit. The problem is that means not enough people were focused on relentless innovation. The benefit is the role of the chief digital officer who didn't report to the CFO emerged, which is actually how I have a job. And so you see that across the industry now. You see innovation happening outside of your CIO. Not always. There are examples where you've got really great CIOs who wear multiple hats. We have a new CIO in our company who does report to our CFO, so I find that ironic. I do report to our chairman and CEO, but she's amazing. She's not cost effective. She's as innovative as I am, and it's just the legacy org structure in play. So one of the things that companies have to do is they have to rethink their org design as they go through change to make sure that they can be as effective as possible. This next one is super critical and it's super important to me. You can't treat technology like construction. So the legacy view of technology, typically within brick and mortars, and this is a brick and mortar, cruising is a brick and mortar, is you spend a lot of money and then you yield the benefit of that asset for 30 years and then you realize it doesn't work as well and you get frustrated with it and then you spend a bunch of money begrudgingly after lots of committee meetings and then you yield the value of that for 30 years. That isn't how non-brick and mortars think about it. So software companies think in iterative evolution of their products. The first iPhone has a fraction of the sensors that the current iPhone does. They have never stopped investing in implementing technology. Now, they're a technology company for technology's sake. I argue that every non-technology company, if they want to aspire to be a technology company, which again, back to my formula, is necessary for success, has to think in that mentality. Now, do they need to invest as much as Apple? No. The investment doesn't have to be the same. But I would argue as you thin out the kind of fits and starts that companies make anyway, it's just a different way of thinking of the investment as opposed to large upfront tranche and lots of languish. The second one is technologists in a kind of a product mentality world think in a very different way than construction companies, and unfortunately than most leaders. Leaders want to take credit for something. They want that rope drop moment. We would open an attraction at Disney, we'd love it, there'd be a rope drop. We even called it a rope drop moment when we opened the parks. people came flooding in. It was a moment that you wanted to cherish and relish. The reality is technology shouldn't be delivered that way. Big bangs fail more often than they succeed. The reverse, and so at Royal we follow what we call the expanding universe approach, which is we try to avoid big bang moments. That doesn't mean we don't like to lavish in the press when we have enough built up. But the reality is we don't try to do that as a promise in the future. We do it as the success is built, because we want to test and adjust in a really small way. And the idea is to iteratively create that product and build it over time. It's faster to market. It might be smaller, which makes it harder to communicate in some cases. But there's less risk, and you live up to this premise that you can operate and deliver technology in a way that's not disruptive. And so it's one of the ways you don't think of technology as a construction company. Now, I realize it's funny, I work for a company that builds cruise ships, builds the best cruise ships, by the way. And so I have to figure out how to deliver technology inside of a company that builds something like this, and it does take time. Some of those decisions require us to think about technology way outside of my comfort zone. I believe you should think of technology in about a 6 quarters, and this is about as far as you can go. And anything beyond that is science fiction at that point. But unfortunately, we're forced to go do that. Somebody asked me the other day, what do you think the technology we will need for a ship we're launching in 2022 will be like? I don't know. I've actually worked with futurists before. There's a great futurist at HP who literally hires science fiction writers to think about how HP, Intel, and others will imagine the world in 10, 20 years so that they can start working their way backwards from that. That's still too far out and still too unknown. So there is balance, of course, as you think of bringing technology to life, but trying to get away from this notion of tech being a construction project is important. I can't speak enough to the importance of change management, and actually in hindsight, as I got questions from Donna's team today, there's probably just not enough even in here on change management. This is a picture I have in my office that I have to hide when kind of our captains of industry move through, because you're not supposed to talk about sinking ships and cruise lines in the same sentence. Apparently something happened in 1914 that told us not to do that. But the reality is I had the fortune of working at the Walt Disney Company, which is an amazing company at helping its employees through change. Change in as much as any time I needed to disrupt something. And so one of the last initiatives I worked on at Disney was the digitization of FastPass at Disneyland. And as we approached the Disneyland leadership, they had their HR team go to their standard process. And their standard process was understanding the impact of any change on their employees, assessing that change on their job skills, their role, what training was necessary, which future recruiting was necessary. They basically had the perfect kit to go do that. When I came to Royal, we didn't have that. And when I first met with our CHRO, he said, I said to him, I think we're going to be buddies. And he said, why? And I said, because we're gonna go disrupt a bunch of stuff, and I need you to come along. And at first he thought it was because I needed some sort of HR protection to go do it. And the reality is what I was looking for was that same change capability. And it turns out we didn't have that. So we've had to build it. We have a new CHRO, and she's amazing and expects that level of commitment. But as you go through transformations, and I'll highlight examples that come back to change management as I go through here, getting people to buy in on the change is as important as the change itself. Everybody has to believe that the thing that's being disrupted needs to be different. I'm going to talk in a little bit about getting out of your swim lane as one of our principles that we have. And in doing so, getting out of your swim lane doesn't mean it's okay just to go tip somebody over for the purpose of tipping them over or trying to diminish their role in a company. Getting outside of your swim lane means helping the outcome be different because it's a positive income for your company, your business, your patient, your guest, your employee, whatever that reason is. And so the change aspect of that is really important. So the third chapter of this is really about inspiring change. So what are some of the things that we do or that I've done to inspire change? And so the first one is I believe storytelling is king. I really do. when I first got to Royal, we started, and you'll hear me talk about again this notion of getting out of your swim lane. One of the first people I hired was the head of R&D, and he and his team, it's a tiny team that focuses on R&D for me. They have no boundaries. As far as I'm concerned, they can go play with anything. And the whole idea is, and I even have them trying to disrupt our team of disruptors. And the purpose of that is really to think it as much white space, green space, blue space, whatever you want to call it. And so the first thing they did is they started working on this notion because they liked, there's a company called Sublimation that does an immersive restaurant in Ibiza. And they liked that concept and they wanted to take it to the next level. And so they pitched this idea to me on how to do virtual reality dining. And we did it for one of our brands, and another brand came to me and said, Jay, I'm really kind of frustrated with you. You've done this experiment. People like it. I pitched the same idea a year ago and they hated it. What gives? A, why are you doing this? And B, what did you do that was different? And I said, well, why don't you send me, talk to me, describe to me, whatever it is, how did you pitch this idea? And he sent me this graphic. This is page 12 of a 20-page PowerPoint presentation. It had charts and graphs and return on investment and a bunch of things that I didn't understand when I read it. And that's how he pitched it. And I said to the gentleman, I said, that's great, but this is how we pitched ours. We built a restaurant. We built a proof of concept. We put immersive goggles on people and we served them food. Once they were able to touch it, feel it, they loved the idea. They didn't understand a PowerPoint presentation because you were pitching food. The idea you need to try when you pitch food is let them sample the food. So that storytelling art, everybody has to figure out how to get the story across. And I recognize I'm showing you a really pretty PowerPoint presentation, but I often encourage people to not do that. Try to think of different ways to help articulate new ideas that aren't really just PowerPoint presentations. The second one, and the way we inspire change, is we think with our hands. So again, the backside of that restaurant. So one of the things that one of our brand presidents just doesn't really love, we call digital signage, and that's where you take a monitor and bolt it on the wall and you explain something to people. I saw one as I walked down the hallway here. I think it was showing the weather and the news today. One of our brands is a more modern luxury brand, and our brand president there just really doesn't love those. And frankly, nor do I. At Disney, we have this thing, if you ever see a sign, you'll notice that you don't actually see the sign because we spent the extra $5 to put a wooden frame around it, just so it felt like it blended into the experience and wasn't just this gross promotion of Samsung or LG or whatever the label was sitting on the outside. And so she really challenged us to think differently. So we created this experiment. And again, in the spirit of thinking with your hands, we literally built this restaurant facade. And the part you can't see is we built 2 plexiglass walls, or windows, both with the graphic of the restaurant. And we did a test to see who could tell which one was real and which one was fake. And the whole idea was to demonstrate that we could think differently by playing with our hands about what the future of technology could look like in the experience, without having to just bolt something on a wall and make it look like it didn't fit. And so this experiment eventually evolved into something I think I'll show later in this presentation. But the whole idea is that if you think with your hands in some cases, and yes, somebody commented to me earlier, this is an expensive or more labor-intensive way to do innovation, but it's a way to really sell the idea. The third one is, and this is a mantra for me, we swim outside of our swim lane all the time. And that can be frustrating for people. I like to argue, and you'll see it in our DNA in a second, to make sure that we do it respectfully. But it's okay. I mean, it goes back to the we've always done it this way. I like to tell people that I get told no on probably, definitely on a daily basis, if not an hourly basis. And part of the thing I like about work is that my job is to turn that no into a yes. Sometimes we have to go a little further. And so there's 2 things I highlight here. One is not all experimentation has to be building out a lab or building out a mock-up of something. We wanted to pitch the idea of different customer service. Customer service hasn't really changed if you think of a hotel in 50 or 60 years. It's kind of the same experience. There's a line, you queue up in that line, you go to the front, after waiting 20, 30 minutes, and there's somebody behind a big monitor who does their best to help you, and they spend a lot of time because typically their technology is antiquated. And they've gotten really good at asking you friendly questions, and it's not because they like you, it's because the system has a spinner that's going on right there, and they're waiting for the next screen to get to. But it's kind of the same experience it always has been. We wanted to think differently about that. We wanted to think about how could we reimagine customer service, and we did it through role-playing. And it literally was this is just a prop that looks somewhat similar to this UTMB health prop right here. That was just printed, cost $20. And we simply role-played through what the customer experience would be like in the future. Now, you could argue the role of technology in doing that is obscure, but there isn't anybody else thinking about it, and so it's okay to swim outside of your swim lane. We didn't do it in a way to say, haha, head of operations, you're bad at doing this. We did it in a way to say, could we together think of a different way to deliver customer service by rethinking of our customer journey, in this case, the guest service experience, in a way that was disarming, and again, all in role play. And role play and adjust, too. And one of the favorite moments, if you've ever worked with somebody in customer service, one of the things they're really passionate about is something called line democratization. And the whole idea of line democratization is, if I'm 10 people back in line, I know perfectly where my spot in line is. So I'm okay that it's going to take me, I'm not okay, but I'll put up with the fact that I need to be there for 20 minutes, because at the end of the day, at least I know I'm 10 people back, and then soon I'll be 9 people back, and soon I'll be 8 people back. And so rethinking customer service puts that line democratization at risk. The reality is, what happens are travel companies have gotten really great at putting line busters out there, and I imagine you all have line busters too, who walk up with an iPad or fancy tablet, ask you a question, they can't help you, so they move on to the next person, or the next person after that. The reality is, you explain to them what your experience feels like. And so you say, hi, my name's Bob, I've got this problem, can you help me? And they say, no, I can't, but if you continue to wait in this line, the next person can help you. You get up to that front desk and they say, hi, what's your name? How can I help you? You just told somebody what your problem was, what your name was, and you repeat the whole thing all over again. My name's Bob, I've got this problem, and this is what's going on. The worst thing ever, so I've already done that twice, is the third time when they say, oh, I need my supervisor, hold on a second. And your supervisor comes over and it's, hey, my name's Bob, it's my problem. You've done that, by the way. I was thinking about this as I was giving this similar story to our team a week ago. You've done this with your cable provider. Your cable provider, you'll get a technical support line. They'll pass you off to somebody else. They have no notion of a seamless customer experience. And so it's possible, even though they're looking at your account, you will re-say the thing 3, 4, or 5 times. We wanted to think differently, and so the way we did that was swimming outside of our swim lane and saying, let's rethink that entire experience. You should never have to give your information more than once. In doing so, you also shouldn't feel like you have to sit in a line. We can still get to line democratization. You can see a virtual queue sitting up there showing what my ETA is. If you think about it, it's not really different than the deli counter today, where I pull the little slip out of paper and I know that I'm 98 and it says 99 up there. So people are already used to that. But it takes you getting out of your swim lane to think different about how to change the customer experience. A lot of companies say that they design with their customer in mind, or they do testing with their customer after they put a product in market. We design with our customers, and we do that on purpose. And so anything that we're building, we send a group of testers on board our ships every week, which is a pretty cool job because you get to go on a cruise every week if you want. But you have to do work, and you have to talk to people, and you have to build empathy for both our guests and our crew. This is a picture of us designing the next generation of safety systems at sea. The guy in the sweatshirt, even though he's not in full gear, is the captain of Spectrum of the Seas. And we are literally designing this experience with him and evolving it with him. As you think of the future of your business, designing with your customers, not just in mind, but as participants, leads to better outcomes. That's just the simplest way to think about it. And the empirical evidence of the last decade or so of my career has shown me that. And so this is just an example of how we do that. We bring customers in, we bring guests in, we bring employees in, or when we can't, we go to them. We package up our ideas and go to them. I was doing something for our leadership last week. I think in the last 9 months, we've talked to 600 guests and 1,000 crew over the 9 months to help inform the next kind of 9 to 12 months of work we want to do. And we just continue that iterative process on an ongoing basis so that we're really engaging customers on a one-to-one basis. The next one, and how we inspire, is really around DNA. So I'm a huge believer of organizational DNA. It's not a mission, it's not a vision, it's kind of what are those attributes and behaviors that you look for to make you as a team successful. And so I've got a handful that if you ever want to work for me, you've got to agree to. And they also work through kind of the ethos of how we work as a group. The first one is, I believe everybody needs to be unreasonably aspirational if they want to be in a transformation business, if they want to focus on technology and they want to focus on customer experience. Now, I would argue, I think everybody in the world should want to think this way, but that's just how I'm wired. So the experiment on the left-hand side you see there is a concept car. If you're familiar with a concept car, automakers create a car for 2025, that is this super sexy, fancy thing that never actually makes it to market. We do the same thing. So we inspire our teams to think about the future, even if it can't come to life. We built this mock-up of a future stateroom that has a digital ceiling, a digital floor, and a digital wall, which in and of itself isn't creative, but the whole experience is choreographed together. So as the lightning bolt runs across the ceiling in the rain, it's raining up in the ceiling, puddles are forming in the water down below to help connect the entire experience together. This is physically impossible in a cruise ship. The amount of coverage to do this, a clearance to do it, would literally require staterooms every other deck as opposed to every deck. But the idea is out there so that as we think of the evolution of technology, we can keep that notion in our head. The second one on the right-hand side is something we did as an evolution of the Azumi restaurant that I showed you earlier, which is in the spirit of continuing to evolve the future of no signage. This is not projection that you see here, the Eden wall. We literally took panels, put glass over it, and then wallpapered the glass with a super thin wood veneer so that when the panels are off, it looks like a wall. It looks like the wall and the rest of the hallway. When the panels are on, just enough light blends through the super thin wood veneer to create signage when needed. And so again, ways that we ask people to lean in to be unreasonably aspirational. The second one is really challenge everything. I have added since in small parentheses below respectfully, which is super important, but I believe it's okay to literally challenge everything. I know people find that frustrating, and I'll give you a couple of examples. When I first joined Royal Caribbean and we leaned in on changing the arrival experience, I met two pieces of resistance. Number one, again, in the theory of swimming outside of my swim lane, was our head of global port services, who wanted nothing to do with me. And eventually, through relentless challenging, but in a really nice way with a smile, I brought him around to the idea because I helped his team co-design the future, and B, I never accepted no as an opportunity to not say, how could I flip that into a yes? But the challenge that we had was we wanted to think differently about the security footprint, because to get people on board in less than 10 minutes, you have to get rid of a lot of stops along the way, which requires you to think about the security footprint of a terminal in a different way. And nobody wanted to go ask the Coast Guard to change the security protocol for a terminal, which is the Coast Guard has to sign off on it. And literally everybody told me no, and I just kept saying, well, how about we just do it one more time? How about we just try once? And after a relentless desire to never hear a no not be a yes, we eventually went back to the Coast Guard, and I dragged everybody along begrudgingly, and it turned out that the Coast Guard said, yeah, we'll help you out, but you have to agree to all of these rules. And that's what everybody was fearful of. They were fearful that all the rules that would be imposed would be so oppressive that we'd never get to the 10 minutes anyway, so why are we even trying? And all they asked us to do were simple security changes. all of which were perfectly acceptable to us, and frankly, all made us feel better about the security of our terminals anyway. And they then agreed to that new premise. So that was one. The second one is when I joined, when you signed up to sign up for a cruise, you had to give them your marital status and your occupation. I had, at the time, when I joined, a 4-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old daughter, or not even 1-year-old daughter. And we went on a cruise, and I didn't understand why. So I put in that both my 4-year-old daughter and my 1-year-old daughter were married. One was a doctor, and the other was a self-made millionaire. I think it was a free-form field I could type in. Because as a customer, you have no rights to know whether my 4-year-old daughter is married, not, what her occupation is. You have no right as a company to ask that of my daughter. And so I wanted to understand why that was wrong. And so I met with everybody to learn that 30 years ago, somebody was curious, asked it on a paper questionnaire, and over time that turned into a digital requirement. And I just simply said, well, we're not going to make that a requirement. And somebody said, well, that's not your job. You just got to implement what's there. And that's the last thing that I ever want to hear from anybody. And so today we no longer ask you if you're married or what your occupation is. And so it's okay to challenge everything. The other one, and I read this, I inserted this over the weekend. In the 30s, an airplane crashed in Australia, and the guy, a man died on the flight. And his son, the last thing he gave to his son was a recorder. And his son ended up going to work for the Australia Transportation Board. And his name is Dr. David Warren. Dr. David Warren was a chemist, and his job at the Australian Transportation Board was to understand why gas tanks blow up as a chemist. But because his dad died in an airplane and his dad had given him a recorder, he was fascinated by this idea that you could potentially record the last moments of an airplane crashing. And so he asked his boss if he could go chase this idea, and his boss said, no, and if you bring it up again, I'm going to fire you. Eventually his boss got promoted, which apparently that happens, and another boss came in, he asked the same question. He said literally the same thing: if you chase this, I'm going to fire you. Boss gets replaced, next person comes in, and that person says, no, you absolutely can. And his supervisor was there as well, I think the superintendent of the Australian Transportation Bureau, and he said, listen, no, if you're caught tinkering with this, we will fire you. And he pulled him aside and said, but I'm going to give you $15,000, which back then was a lot. We'll call it research. And on the side, I want you to kind of continue this along because maybe this has some merit, but I don't want my name associated with it in case it fails. And in a walkthrough, the superintendent of the Australian Bureau, came through with his British counterpart, and the British counterpart loved the idea. Loved the idea so much, he put him on a plane, sent him to London, he pitched the idea, and today we have safety recorders in our airplanes. And there's a couple moments in there. One is, this guy never accepted no. He swam outside of his swim lane probably more than anybody and put his career at risk to some degree. But with that challenge, we now have safer airplanes as a result of the learnings we have. And of course there was change involved. At the time, the Royal Air Force said, no, you'll never do, or the Australian Air Force said, no, this will never happen, because all you're going to get is a bunch of pilots swearing at each other anyway. The pilots unit said, no, it's going to be Big Brother listening in on everything. And it turned out eventually to yield really valuable data that has helped make air travel much safer. This one goes hopefully without saying. You can't speak about customers and not be obsessed with the customer experience. So we are obsessed at all times. I think everybody has to have empathy for their customer experience. You have to sweat the details. I'll give the example on the right because I'm running a little late on time. Having implemented My Magic Plus at Disney World, I have stayed at a Disney hotel probably close to 500 times. It's because where I stayed when I went there for work. And right after we implemented this Know Your Customer, I got this really nice note, I call it my 500th visit, from the housekeeping staff, recognizing the first time I've ever visited Disney World. And it's a moment just to say everybody has to be involved, and if we don't sweat the details as a leadership, you're going to find mistakes like this. And so this one, I will never, this is a picture I took from my room of that card, and I never let it go because of that. Tech is a team sport, so from a DNA perspective, everybody has to be involved. I purposely don't use a bunch of nerds or engineers. Tech is a team sport, and everybody within a corporation needs to be involved and participate. We think, we show this all the time to people, we think this is what we're doing. We think we have this aspirational transformation going on at any given time. We know this is what everybody else thinks about us at any given time. That's okay. It absolutely is okay, because some of these plates should have been broken. Some of the plates probably still needed to be around, which is the whole thing to say that it's okay to challenge everything. In the last few minutes, just to think of our evolving customer experience, I've talked about some of these. We have a pretty broad mission to say we want to digitize everything. Somebody once asked me, does that mean you're going to go digitize kind of the custodial experience? And at Disney, that one of the last things I saw there is we had a team working on literally digitizing a trash can. And you can say, what's the value behind that? But the reality is, if you put a little bit of a sonar cube inside of a trash can, you eventually can see how full it is, and you can better operate how you clean trash, frankly, by thinking differently. For us, we think in a couple different ways. As we evolve our customer experience, again, it's about removing friction. There's real friction. I already mentioned getting people from car to bar in less than 10 minutes. We're also trying to reimagine how we think of the arrival experience, the first impression. We're building a gorgeous new terminal here in Galveston that really will be transformational in trying to bring people and really arrive and enjoy the experience for the first time with our brands. We build products to help people make the most of their vacation. There's real friction in a vacation, so one of the most common things that people need access to is their folio throughout their visit. So digitizing simple things makes it easy for people to avoid it. We're also big believers that you design ecosystems. There's this notion of cognitive overhead. So our goal is to reduce the cognitive overhead that consumers have with us so they can enjoy their vacation. You can apply that method to any business. Anything that you have to make your customer think about is time they're not thinking about something that they actually care about more. So whether that's wayfinding systems, whether that's information that they have to get, whatever that thing is, we try to think about how we reduce that cognitive overhead so that they don't have to learn a design system or learn something that's unique to us. And that includes learning how to engage with us. I shouldn't have to have a cheat sheet to know what website, app, kiosk, part of your business to engage with to be able to interact with it. We also focus on removing friction from the vacation experience. I promised to mention lazy friction. I'm a big fan that even while reducing real friction, you have to reduce lazy friction. We tested something a couple years ago about this notion of, could I just order a drink so I don't have to go wait in line for that drink? And that isn't real friction, but that's lazy friction. And we're in short order going to be launching something that allows you to order food and beverage from wherever you are in a pool, so that we just bring that food and beverage to you, and that allows you to stay on vacation faster. How you apply that to you all, again, it's all about making sure that you think of friction through kind of real painful moments. And we used to call them surprise and delight moments at Disney, but those moments that remove kind of the lazy things that you put in front of people to help them have a better experience. That could apply, we also think of our staterooms that way. And then we also think about how we just build technology to let people enjoy the fun side of our business. This is something we put on our ships called X-ray vision. It allows guests to see through parts of the walls that they normally can't get to on a ship. This is the bridge, just so that they can really enjoy the product. I've got about 2 minutes for questions, and so if there's any questions out there, I'd love to take the opportunity to hear any questions you might have. Yeah, there's mics there, so feel free to.
I got one. Thank you. Very good presentation. And so I wanted to ask, if you look up the definition between hospitality, the industry that you're now in,
Yep.
and hospital, there's a large variance, even in the simple dictionary definition.
Sure.
So how can we put hospitality into the hospital?
So I mentioned this to a group this morning. I believe there's an easy answer. You have to be thinking of your customer journey from end to end. Your customers interact with you, patients interact with you on a regular basis. That's from when they don't feel well to their first moment experiencing you as a product to, and then every moment beyond. Donna was sharing a story about when a patient moves from doctor to doctor. Sometimes they're treated like a new patient. Not to them, they're not. And so those moments really matter. It goes back to my making you fill out another thing of paper. I imagine there's paper floating around this health system. So between friction, lines, your customer journey, the seamlessness of that, there's a ton of low-hanging fruit, I imagine, that is easy to go knock off that will make people pay more attention then to their healthcare. Because you don't want somebody who's already sick coming in and worrying about all of the hassle. You just want them focused on their care. And so I think there's a ton of opportunity to do that.
Oh, you've got a question, Martha, but I was going to mention on this, one of the things Jay said this morning that really made me think, oh, wow, we do need to do that. He asked if we had ever mapped out the end-to-end patient experience for whether it's coming to a clinic, coming to get an x-ray, being admitted to the hospital and discharged. Had we done that and then let all of us, kind of everybody, interact and find where you would identify pain points and then figure out ways to fix those. And it just reminded me of way back in the day at MD Anderson. We had done that when we were changing how we accepted referrals and how we checked in patients at the front desk. And we literally had this back in the day, a big mural up and people could go by and write on it. It was in the back of house, and we got a lot of our ideas for perfecting that from the people who were actually using the system, and then we also did that for our patients. So, I think we could do a better job thinking about that end-to-end experience and where we do have friction points so we could have a better experience for our patients. So I'd like that idea of thinking of the end-to-end experience. Martha?
That was wonderful. I have a zillion questions, but I'm going to narrow it down to one, which is about language access. And so all of this was in English. Does this happen in multiple languages as well?
For us, yes. We just launched in traditional Chinese, Spanish, digitally, and then for customers, our top languages are Spanish, French, Portuguese, German, and Chinese. So yes, for us, yes, because our customers come from all over the world. There is a value prop eventually. The question, do you provide, translation for 0.5% if you've got somebody coming from, I don't know, wherever. So you've got to suss out that value, but for the most part, yeah. It's a great question. We're at time. I want to be respectful of people's time. If you have questions, one of the things if you hit me up on LinkedIn, I'm happy to answer unlimited questions because I am part of that always connected world that's out there. So thank you for taking the time this afternoon.
UTMB Health, working together to work wonders.